The next set is we're going to look at height. This is really one of the funnest ones. And there is an entire conversation of how to create height in fonts. There are three ways to create heights in fonts. There is a way of using pixels, M sizes, or percentages. In order to use font heights, we're going to actually use font, indent, font size. You notice my font is white. I forgot my beautiful semicolon. So let's try that again just so you guys can see the difference of when it works and when it doesn't work. Here you go. Here's my variations: weight, style, variant, family, and size. That looks good. Again, we're always checking. Every time we're going through this, you're going to hear me talk about this over again. We're always checking our own work to make sure we have it right. So I've added a font size of 24 into my style guide. One of the things you've noticed is I've zoomed into the page to actually show you a demonstration. But in order to see real pixels, I actually want to zoom out of the page so that I can actually see it at 100%. One of the great things about the web now is we can zoom in and out of the pages. But because we're actually using pixels, we're using absolute sizes, a lot of times when people zoom in and out, that actually might not be helpful. This is actually where we would use the next value called M. And M is more of a proportional text. And this is an ability to actually have the page. I'm going to use M's. I'm going to reload the page. And you notice that it is really now super large because it's zooming into what the page looks like. M is another value. I'm actually going to bring this back, reload the page. Again, it's very, very large. I'm going to bring it back into 6. Reload the page, and now that starts looking like a real piece of text. I'm going to zoom it again. And again, when I set it to 1, think of it as the font in M is proportional. If I set it to 2, it's double of the browser width. So one of the things that happens, and remember in the beginning of we talked to non-functional style guides, we talked about accessibility. And I talked about the scaling of fonts and said if you needed to control the scaling of fonts, we'd have to think about that in CSS. And here's a perfect example of why I would use M versus pixels. And I said that there was a third variation. So I normally use pixels. And the reason I use pixels is because I know that certain fonts, and I don't want people to mess with them, zoom in or zoom out. I want fonts to be exactly the same just because I'm very fanatical like that with my CSS and my design. And certain designers might say, nope, I want the font to always be 16, 17, 18, 24 pixels. But if in your non-functional requirements someone says, we want an ability to scale the fonts depending on our audience. Again, I go back to the example of accessibility. If we're looking for an audience that's an older audience that's going to need an ability to scale, then we would use M's. The great thing with M's is if I want to do 1.5, I can actually use decimal points. So I've set up a language of pixels, which are absolute. I've got 16, or I've got 24. I've got M's that are actually proportional, and this is where it gets a little funnier when I zoom in. I reload, nothing happens. Of course, when I zoom in, it kind of keeps it proportional. And the third one is percentage, where I can say font is 100%. Let's see what happens. And of course, it's 100% of the browser font. Because, again, if I'm scaling the page, it'll scale with it. If I wanted to do 50%, it'll go 50% of whatever the font size is. This is really great with using M's and percentages. If I want to create a really nice scalable page, this is really one of the things I would use. Again, this is really a stylistic choice, and depending on what functionality you're going to be working on, if you need to scale the fonts using JavaScript, if you need to have the user scale the fonts in the browser, it is really one of these style choices versus that sort of functional requirements. Again, I'm a pixel kind of guy, because I love moving pixels. I have a design background, so it really is the choice that I want to have, and a choice that you should make for yourself. One of the things that I'll reiterate with CSS is CSS isn't really a set of ground rules. You notice that in order to do font sizes, I had 3 ways of doing things. It really is a stylistic choice, and you'll notice that as you see more people do CSS, they'll have their own style of doing things. There'll be 3 ways of doing the same thing, and it really is up to you to decide what makes you more comfortable.